Welcome to another episode of Chax Chat. Join Chad Chilius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started.
Welcome, everyone. Today's podcast is sponsored by Chax Training and Consulting. If you'd like your company announced during our podcast introduction, consider sponsoring our podcast transcript. My name is Chad Chilius. I'm an Adobe certified instructor, as well as Director of Training Solutions and Principal at Chax Training and Consulting.
And my name is Dax Castro. I'm an Adobe certified PDF accessibility trainer, and Chad and I are certified as an accessible document specialist by the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. If you'd like your certification, head on over to accessibilityassociation.org/certifications. And Chad, in fact, we just got an email recently from somebody who just passed their accessible document specialist test and was very excited about it and wanted to thank us for our podcast. What was interesting, though, is that they said, I learned about it from listening to your podcast.
Yeah.
So that little intro that we do every single time, and we go through and talk about being a member of IAAP and the ADS helps someone else, which is so amazing, man. It's so great.
It is. And she had said that listening to our podcast helped her to pass the exam, which was even cooler in my opinion.
I agree. And to be able to touch as many lives as we do. And I really do feel like that's something we do on the daily. And it makes me feel very fulfilled to know that we're affecting change in people's lives. So yeah.
I couldn't agree more, Dax. And especially, with our new endeavor, with Chax Training and Consulting, I said to you the other day, I just really enjoy helping people. So all good stuff. Today we wanted to, one of the topics we wanted to talk about was, and we've brought this up before in the past, but it is the multi-line hyperlinks in a document, and the challenges that that they can present. For those of you who've been doing document remediation, PDF remediation, you may have noticed that when you have a multi-line hyperlink, and there's reasons for this that we'll talk about, but when you have a multi-line hyperlink, what happens is a separate hyperlink rectangle is created for each line of that hyperlink, right? So whenever you have a long hyperlink that wraps from one line to another, if you look at that in your PDF file, you'll have two separate hyperlink boxes. And conversely, in the tags tree, you will also have two separate link tags and link OBGR objects assigned to them. And it's because that in the current version of the PDF format, you cannot have what's that shape called, Dax? Would it be a parallel, not a parallelogram?
It'd be an irregular, regular hitbox, something that's not a rectangle.
Right. So like if you could draw, an odd shaped, an odd shape, I guess is what I'm trying to say, then it would be not a big deal. But because of the limitation in the PDF format, you end up with multiple links for what should be one separate link, right? And so what's the problem with that from a user standpoint, Dax?
Well, the problem is that you end up hearing link twice. So what it sounds like to a screen reader user is that you'll hear the link being announced, and then you'll hear the URL you're going to or the alt text thereof, and then you'll hear it one more time for when it breaks that line. And we always talk about, I even have a video on our YouTube channel, youtube.com, and the new @ symbol. We have new handles now for YouTube, at A11y. You can see there is a video there on multiple multi-line hyperlinks and how to fix them, because it announces link twice. But the reality is that as a screen reader user, I can just move past that and keep on reading. It's not a barrier, but it is in fact not correct from a info and relationship standpoint. There is one URL on the page, and therefore there should be one URL in the tags tree. And this is why it becomes an issue, because we've been teaching everyone, hey, go back and maybe you can talk about how we, walk through how we typically fix that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and there's more than one way to approach this problem. But again, and to elaborate on what you were saying, Dax, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when the first link is announced, it's really only reading part of that link, right? Because the contents of that URL is actually broken apart into two separate link tags.
Sort of. It depends on how well the document was remediated. So when you go in and run the fix up inside Acrobat to set the content key with the URL, you in fact now have alt text for that URL, which is what is being read. So typically you will hear the full URL for that first part, and because it now has alt text. And you will hear it again when you hear it for the second half. But if the document has not been remediated, or that step has not been taken, then yes, you will hear the first part of the URL being voiced, and then the link, which is the full link. It'll take you exactly where you're supposed to go. But then you'll hear link again and hear the second half of the link. And then again, it will take you where you want to go. So depending upon what stage of remediation it's at, you could have two different user experiences.
So again, to fix the problem, right? So we just kind of described, what the problem is. So to fix the problem, the way that it needs to be structured is that you should have one link tag, one link OBJR object, and they should all be inside of that one link tag. So you could kind of approach the problem directly in the tags pane. Basically move the content from we'll just call it the second link tag, move that up into the first one. And that way all of the content exists in that one link tag. And then you would want to delete the link OBJR and the link tag of the second instance. So that would be one approach to that problem. Another way you can deal with that, and this is one of the ways that I do it. If you go to the edit tool in Adobe Acrobat, and then up at the top, you click on link, add, edit, web, or document link, it will show you the multiple rectangles for that multi-line hyperlink.
Right.
And by deleting one of those rectangles, it also deletes the link tag in the tags tree. And then I like to kind of resize that rectangle to encompass both lines. And again, it's not perfect, right? Because your hit area could very well include part of the text that is not the hyperlink.
Right. And that's like the inherent problem of the whole idea of these hitboxes, right? Yeah. Is that you get a rectangle and that's all you get. And the rectangle can either be two different rectangles that are perfectly around just the text that is a hyperlink, or this giant rectangle that is around both pieces. So, and Chad, I've run into the problem where I've had two URLs in the same line. Oh, where one box overlaps the other box. So I'll have a short URL, like it'll say, make sure you visit our website, our information page, and that information page is a URL. And then, or you can visit and then it's something that breaks a line. Well, what ends up happening is one hitbox overlaps the other hitbox.
Oh, yeah.
And that becomes a real problem. And in the end, what you have to do for that is you have to basically leave the 2 boxes there, because there's no way to adjust the Z order, the stacking order of those boxes, right?
It's bizarre, right? I've dealt with that too, Dax, where, you've got one link overlapping the other, and in our brains, I want to say send to back.
Right.
Right. I want to say send this one behind the other one, but there's really no mechanism in which to do that. It appears that you could do it in the contents pane. Right, because all those annotations are listed at the top of the page in which you're editing, but you can't. There's no way. There's no way to adjust them. It's really, really weird. And the irony of our discussion here, right, is that the reason that it does those separate boxes is for the sighted user.
Right.
It has nothing to do with accessibility. As a matter of fact, it causes an accessibility problem. But what InDesign is trying to do is make the hitbox clickable for somebody using a mouse, at the appropriate area. So it's really an interesting conundrum. And so what are our, what can we offer to our users to improve this situation?
Well, it's always an arduous task when you have multi-line hyperlinks to go in and fix them. If you're concerned about info and relationships, the answer is you should fix them. I mean, that's, it's a thing. But there are instances where fixing them can cause other barriers. So you kind of have to pick and choose your battles to figure out what you want to present. Now, of course, you can use something like Bitly, right? And have Bitly links, which are great and trackable and free. But some government organizations won't allow you to have non-shortcut links. They have to be the actual link because the document's going to be printed and they want the full archive URL to be there rather than a Bitly link, which may, Bitly may hopefully exist forever, but may or may not exist in 10 years, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to be fair, like those, if you've got a hyperlink that spans more than one line, first of all, the reason that they're spelling out the hyperlink is so that when viewed on the printed page, somebody can type in that URL and get to that website, right? But boy, is that a pain. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's not a great experience, because you got to you got this really long URL. I mean, I did work for an institute down in DC, and they had endnotes, like extensive endnotes, and every endnote had this really long URL. And I'm like, man, if I had to type that in manually, that is not a great experience for me. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of Bitly. And you saying that some institutions don't allow them, it reminded me, I was at a government agency that did not allow Dropbox links. But if you Googled Dropbox and clicked on the Dropbox result, you could get in.
Yeah.
It was really crazy.
No, and I would say that, if I've seen really long URLs, all I do is go to the parent website and do a search, or I'll search for that title in Google rather than trying to type out that entire URL. So, yeah.
So anyway, I guess, the takeaway here, I mean, whenever possible, try to shorten those URLs, try to make them easy for somebody to kind of type in and utilize. But if you can't, and you do have multi-line hyperlinks, just know that you do have a little bit of work ahead of you to make them compliant.
Yeah. No, it is definitely a thing. I think the question that we're really trying to answer here is, do we have to change those? Do I have to go in and make those 2 URLs one URL? Right, Chad?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I will tell you, none of the checkers are going to flag it as an error. Right. So it's not like it's not like the checker is going to let you know. But again, Dax, you and I always err on the side of the user. Right. And knowing that it's not going to be a great experience, whenever I can, I definitely try to fix them.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. The other thing I want to talk about, Chad, is you found an interesting bug in the newest version of Photoshop. We were talking about in one of our previous podcast. We were talking about in one of our previous podcasts about the new IPTC fields inside images, inside the metadata for images.
Right.
Normally we use the title or description or, heading or whatever, but now they have alt text accessibility and extended description accessibility. But you found something out about Photoshop, right?
Yeah. And it was actually in preparation for the Design Accessibility Summit, the Creative Pro Design Accessibility Summit. That conference is a virtual conference. So Dax and I have to pre-record our sessions to kind of eliminate technical glitches and things like that. And as I was, and this is so frustrating. I know you've been there, Dax, but it's so frustrating when you're recording a video and you're trying to show a feature. And I wanted to show the alt text metadata field, right? That was the topic that I was talking about. And I open up Photoshop and I'm like, yeah, if you go in here to the file info in Photoshop, you will find, and I'm like, where is it? I'm like scrolling and I'm looking. I'm like, am I losing my mind? Because we just had a guest on.
Caroline DeRozier.
Thank you. Caroline kind of brought that up. I think she sat on the board for IPTC to kind of integrate that into the products. And we literally talked about that. And as I'm recording this video, I'm like, the field is not there. I open up Illustrator and it's there.
Yeah.
And I actually reached out to Caroline. I was like, hey, Caroline, am I losing my mind? Right? Like of all the programs that I need this feature in, it's Photoshop, right? All of my photos, all of my graphics, I need to add alt text and I can't find the field. And she's like, yeah, they didn't get it into the latest release. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you got to be kidding me. So if anybody out there is looking to use this feature, you're going to have to wait a little bit to be able to use it in Photoshop. It is in Illustrator, and I believe it's in InDesign. Not that you're going to use that a whole lot, but at least in Illustrator, your bar charts, your pie graphs, your any illustration, any Illustrator graphics, you will be able to use that feature. But Photoshop, the option is missing, so
yeah,
we'll have to wait a little bit for that one.
Yep. It is definitely an issue. I use Bridge. For me, I'll do a batch of images and then I'll go open Bridge and then just go assign alt text. Matter of fact, I actually started doing that for all of some of the images I keep using on my PowerPoint slide decks for presentations. I started doing that for the the Design and Accessibility Summit, which happened actually last week. And I just decided, I'm going to start putting these into the metadata because I'm tired of rewriting descriptions over and over again. So so I started doing that.
And so explain to our users how you leverage that, Dax, because PowerPoint can't grab that for you. Right. PowerPoint doesn't have the ability like InDesign does to go into the metadata of that image and grab it. How are you using that?
So leveraging that alt text in Bridge, I'm able to then, when I place those images into InDesign, which is typically where I'm trying to move away from PowerPoint, right?
Okay.
Because PowerPoint has when you try to export a document from PowerPoint, there is so much cleanup that you have to do. It is unreal how much cleanup. Matter of fact, Chad, we should do a podcast episode just on accessibility for PowerPoint. I think that would be a great podcast.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I'm moving away from the PowerPoint versions, and I'm trying to make InDesign versions of my slide decks. And so being able to go into Bridge and find that image, then add my image description in the alt text accessibility field, I no longer have to worry about adding that every time I try to place that image into InDesign. So I place it into InDesign like I normally would, and then you would I right click and then hit Object Export Options, and then underneath the first tab for alt text, all I have to do is hit in the drop down, select the new accessibility alt text field, and it pulls that alt text directly from the metadata inside my photo. And in fact, I can create two different versions, an extended version or a longer one and a shorter one. And so it makes it really nice to be able to not have to rewrite that. And I will say, if I'm going to use PowerPoint, if for some reason I need to use PowerPoint, it's really easy for me to go into Bridge, right click, open that image up and copy and paste that alt text from the metadata into my alt text description inside PowerPoint without having to sit down and go through the cognitive exercise of coming up with alt text for that image.
Right. Yeah. So in a way, you're kind of using Bridge as another tool. And as you drop an image into PowerPoint, you just go to Bridge and copy the alt text and then paste it into PowerPoint.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I'm just using it as a holding place so I have a library of alt text, but the library is embedded in the image itself, which makes it really nice. And no matter where I use that image, I'm able to access that alt text. And in fact, you can right click on an image inside Windows and go to Properties and then Advanced Details and actually see that alt text. I don't know actually if you can see that in Windows as a new IPTC field. I'd be interested to test that out.
I didn't know if Windows was IPTC aware. I know Windows has metadata, but I don't think it's using the IPTC engine.
I know that it does have IPTC for medical and some of the other things in the properties, but I don't know if it's actually using the core. So that will be interesting.
Well, and so, what you were saying, Dax, it really does make a good argument. You said you're trying to create more in InDesign versus PowerPoint. I mean, typically the argument that people make is, I want to use the animation features in PowerPoint, which is fine. And I would argue that you can do that to some extent in InDesign as well. But the problem is if your objective is making your document or making an accessible PDF from that document, you don't want to use animations anyway.
Right.
So leveraging InDesign, you're certainly not losing anything. You're only gaining by using InDesign.
Right. And I will say that if I need to do animations inside PowerPoint, I use the old way. It's so funny how we go back to the old ways of doing things before all these new tools when we're talking about accessibility. So if I need to make sure that I'm going to produce an accessible PowerPoint, I will use slide animations. So I will use a slide at a time. Like if I want a cursor to move from one area to another, or maybe highlight something, I'll create a new slide with that action on it, rather than actually creating the animation in the one slide. And that way I can hide those slides when I want to export to PDF and I get my animation, but I don't have to worry about having a garbage slide with all this extra stuff on it.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's good to share those workflow tips, right, with our listeners, because, those can be really valuable and really useful tips, for other people doing the same thing.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that, the other thing that I do when in PowerPoint is I no longer take a text and make the box that the text is in a color. Like if I want to have white text on a purple background, I will I used to make the box purple and then, type my text inside it and off I went. But what ends up happening is PowerPoint now creates a figure for the box, nests the text inside the figure, and then wants alt text for the box. So you end up having to do all this cleanup. So now if I need a box, I do it the old wrong way. I call it the wrong way.
Right.
Create the purple box, put it in the background, put my white, my regular text on top of it. Which of course creates its own issues, because then I don't know how that's going to work with PAC 2021, because will it show color contrast failure because now I have white text on what is essentially a white background, because does it know that that box is in between? So, it's always a challenge. There's always something to have to worry about. And unfortunately, that's why I'm moving away from PowerPoint for my slide decks. But it's a hard transition because PowerPoint makes it really easy.
Yeah, I mean, certainly to create the document, but when you, to your point, when you export to PDF, you open up that tags tree and you're like, oh my goodness, like this is just, it's just so messy. But and then the last thing I think we wanted to talk about today, Dax, was captions versus alternate text.
Right. So many people get this mixed up, right, Chad?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Like, I like to describe it in a very simple, in very simple terms. However, there are some times when they can be the same, right? But overall, your caption is generally describing at a high level what's happening in the image. Right. So it might say, a group of girls playing at the, Governor Mifflin Community Playground, something like that. That's my local school. Sure. But then the alternate text would be describing what's happening in the photo. Right. So the alternate text might say something like, a diverse group of young children playing on the, what's that called? The thing that spins around?
Merry-go-round.
Oh, thank you. A diverse group of children playing on the merry-go-round on a sunny day in the fall at the Governor Mifflin Playground, right? Something like that. So you're describing what's happening in the image versus like a high level description of the photo, right? And that's really, and again, I far from want to try to oversimplify writing alternate text, because Dax, you and I teach a 3-hour session on writing effective alternate text. So it seems really simple at the onset until you have to sit down and do it. And that's when people typically typically are challenged, because it's harder than you think. Right.
Yeah.
But then like right now, Dax, for our good friends over at Creative Pro, I'm remediating it's the accessibility issue. And there's an article in there that's talking about creating an effect in Photoshop. And in a case like that, like it's really hard to describe a screenshot of a program, right? In some cases. And so in those situations, the caption is pretty much describing what is happening in the figure. And so what I've been finding in a document such as that, I've been pretty much using the caption for the alternate text.
Right.
Like I said, it doesn't happen. I would say more often than not, it's not the case. But I think with like technical documentation and things like that, you could run into a situation where the caption in some cases does describe the photo, and you can use it for your alternate text.
Right. And that's definitely where you want to artifact the image, but you can run into cognitive problems, right?
Yeah, Dax, you and I had a discussion with Lucy Greco when we were at the Accessing Higher Ground conference.
Right.
And I was talking, Lucy, by the way, is blind. She's an awesome person to talk to. She's really brings a great perspective. And I was telling her about how I often artifact the figures, and she was not happy with me, right? She was not happy with me at all. And I said, Lucy, why is that a problem? And she said, because if I'm talking to a sighted user and we're both reading the same document, she may say the figure at the bottom of page 7.
Right.
Or the figure underneath this heading. And if you've artifacted the figure, I am now lost.
Except when the caption starts with figure 2.5 and then gives the captioned text, right? Typically, there's some kind of label in the caption. Not always, but typically there's some kind of caption in the identifier in the caption that lets people know that that's a description for the image. Right. And I think that's when I feel safer to artifact that image and just keep the caption, because the caption's going to be voiced as caption figure 4.5, description of two kids playing on a rusty merry-go-round in the park, right? I mean, so I mean, it is definitely it removes some of those barriers, but you have to think about these things when they happen, and how is that user experience going to be affected by what I do? Because definitely just having a random description in the middle of some text without any marker or identifier could be problematic. So,
but Dax, like I always say, I'm always learning, right? Yep. Like in this industry, I'm always learning, and it was just very enlightening for me to have her explain that to me, because right. it was a situation that by and large I was ignoring. I was totally forgetting about that potential situation. So I think ultimately that the more you know, the better equipped you are to make educated decisions as you're remediating the file. And so to your point, if the caption does say figure 3, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's a case where maybe I am okay artifacting that figure, because in the caption of the text, it says this is figure 3. Or,
right. Well, the opposite though. I mean, if you have captions that have good descriptions, but they don't have that label, then you can in fact copy the caption out and paste it into the alt text field and then just artifact the caption. So you have the opportunity to do one or the other. You can either artifact the image or artifact the caption. And at least that way, when the person gets to the image, they're going to hear graphic and then your description that would have been in the caption. So.
I think I'd want to put it in the actual text field, right? In the case of text?
No, because the whole goal is to make sure that they know that it's a graphic, right?
Okay.
Right. So if I have a series of graphics, I have the choice of either artifacting the caption or artifacting the image. If I artifact the image, it's because the caption is sufficient to describe the image. But if there's no identifier there in that caption to say, hey, I'm describing figure 4.5, or I'm describing a graphic, and it's just two kids playing in the field, right? That doesn't tell me that there's an image. I could guess there's an image, but it might just be body text, right? But if you add it as alt text for the image, now I hear graphic, two kids playing in the field. And I go, oh, okay.
Or how about this? You copy that text, paste it in the actual text field, and at the beginning you say figure 3.
Sure. I mean, there's not a barrier against that, but I got to assume that if you got figure 3 from somewhere, you probably got it from the caption. The only instance I could think where that might not happen, and I've had this happen, where you have a photograph that has the figure label. We get this a lot in maps. When you're in the engineering world, you get a aerial or a plot map, and in the actual PNG, or a lot of the times it's a DXF that's been converted to a PDF, in the actual graphic, it actually has the figure label, figure 25, right? It's part of the graphic and therefore isn't revealed to a person using assistive technology. Then yeah, you could definitely use actual text to say figure 25 and then, your description following.
Sure.
So that could definitely be a thing.
Dax, when you were talking about that DXF, it reminded me of somebody asked me recently. They're like, if I have an accessible PDF file and I place it into InDesign, right? Yeah. I get that question all the time, and I'm just like, yeah, you get absolutely nothing. And they're like, well, why not? Why doesn't it understand? I'm like, listen, I don't write the software. I'm just telling you, what is going to happen. And I understand their frustration, because you're like, well, I'm giving it all of the information, but InDesign is just kind of ignoring it. And they're right. InDesign does not recognize those tags when you place that PDF as a graphic. So, yeah. Well, listen, everybody, thanks so much for tuning in today. We hope you gleaned some useful information from our discussion. And once again, we want to thank Chax Training and Consulting for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. And just remember, if you're looking for in-person or online training, or struggling to establish an accessibility program within your organization, head on over to accessibilityunraveled.com to learn more. My name is Chad Chilius.
And my name is Dax Castro, where each week we unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.